Hello, everybody, and on behalf of Edelman, welcome to Lessons in Leadership, a conversation with Wes Moore. And we are thrilled to have all of you here. I am speaking from New York, and Wes is speaking from his hometown of Baltimore. And I know we have folks from all across the U.S. and frankly all around the world who tuned in to see Wes and to hear more from him. And several of you know Wes, but before I get into more about Wes and his background and his introduction, I have to caveat that he is a dear, dear friend and a very longtime friend. And for the sake of not aging us more than we are already aged, I'm not going to tell you how long we've been friends for. But simply, he is, in addition to being a great friend, and he was a groomsman in my wedding and stood beside me on one of the most important days of my life, he also happens to be one of the finest people and equally important, one of the finest leaders I've had the privilege to know in my life. And ordinarily, in a situation such as this, I would begin by ticking off a list of accolades associated with our guest speaker. But given our guest speaker is Wes Moore, and given we only have 60 minutes, I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to get to questions or answers for that matter. So I will begin by giving a very brief overview of Wes before turning it over to him, and then we can dive right in. So several of you know Wes, and for those of you who don't, he is a social entrepreneur. He is a combat veteran. He's a very successful business executive. He is a former Rhodes Scholar, a White House Fellow, a member of the Maryland College Football Hall of Fame, and a board director. And among the boards he sits on are the board of Under Armour, which is based in his hometown of Baltimore, as well as the board of IAC, which, as many of you know, is Barry Diller's corporation, and several others. And currently, he is the chief executive officer of the Robin Hood Foundation, which is one of our nation's largest poverty-fighting organizations. Speculation has it, several people say he will soon be Governor Wes Moore, and there are even more people who say and who hope that one day we even may see a President Wes Moore. But for the time being, it is my distinct honor and pleasure and privilege to introduce my very dear friend, Wes Moore.
Well, I tell you, I mean, every time I'm around Mustafa Riffat, I am better. And in fact, I've always said it's like my only hope and dream is that one day when you're president, that you can make me the ambassador somewhere warm. I'll take Jamaica, I'll take Trinidad, I'll take whatever you want to give me, just somewhere where it's like shoes optional.
I think it's safe to say my only shot at public service, my best shot at public service is through you. So you know, my both hands. But with
No,
that,
but I will say, it is a distinct honor, being your friend. I don't know many people on this planet who are more gifted, more talented, more loyal, more caring than you. And yes, the day of your wedding, when you married Eileen, you became markedly better. I watched great.
I agree.
Because she is remarkable, but to be clear, she got quite the catch too. So I'm so grateful for you and for all of you for checking out our conversation today. This is gonna be a lot of fun.
That's so kind of you, and I think we can agree off the bat that Don and Eileen certainly, are the rising tide. But
Yes,
with
sir.
that, if it's all right with you, I'd love to dive right in. So I guess I will begin by posing a question, and that I'll begin with the most recent news, in fact, that as of May, you will be stepping down as Chief Executive Officer of the Robin Hood Foundation, and you have had a very successful 4-year tenure. And if I were writing this, I'd say it with an asterisk. And the reason I say asterisk is because it's been 3 human years and 3 normal years, and the 4th year has been 1 COVID year and 1 pandemic year, which I think we can all agree has been incredibly trying. But most importantly, trying and devastating for the communities which you and Robin Hood so ably serve. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your leadership, your tenure. You have taken this program from being a New York City organization to scaling it nationally. You have done a lot of programming in your home state of Maryland, as well as across the nation. So tell us a bit about what it's been like leading the organization and leading it through a time of the pandemic.
Yeah, this was an amazingly complicated year for everybody. But I mean, I remember when I first got an understanding of what we're talking about, and was actually very on a very personal front, where we had members of our team get sick early, and again at that time, sick from something that none of us really understood what was going on at that point. We started hearing about this COVID-19, everyone saying, wash your hands, or, wear a mask if you can. And, but we were still just going off of so much information all over the place, that some of it contradicting one another. And we just weren't sure exactly what was going on. And so it was early. It was early March, very early March, when I made the decision that we're going to go ahead and close our offices down. And at that time, and I remember it was interesting. It was interesting, Moose. I remember telling Dawn and saying, I'm going to have to close the offices. And I said, I think I have to close it for like a couple months, thinking that was a long time. Like, I think for like a couple months, we're going to have to close.
Remember, we had breakfast, we were riding the subway.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. In fact, right, that was one of the last connections before everything got shut down.
That's right.
And I swear I thought this would be like, man, this is going to be really hard, but it's going to be, hopefully it'll be relatively contained until we know what was going on. No idea that there would be going on a year, and we're still, offices are still closed, and we'll still be a good while before we reopen. But it was one of these things where from Jump Street, we also knew who this would hit hardest and who it would hit first. Because immediately you just go to this dynamic of, first of all, understanding the nature of how economic inequality showed itself beforehand, right? We literally just released a report talking about the fact that for people, just for New York City, the report we just released, that half of New York City lived in poverty for at least a year over the past 4 years before COVID-19. Not half of a borough, not half of a demographic, half of the city lived in poverty for at least a year over the past 4 years prior to COVID-19. We just released that report. So we were going to show how devastating this measure of economic inequality was before this. And then once we started seeing things like restaurants being closed, hotels being closed, the hospitality industry, the one thing we knew and immediately we had an understanding of was this. The hospitality industry, and you look at things like hotels and restaurants, this is not just a revenue generator for any jurisdiction, right? It's not just the thing that gives kind of an initial sense of a heartbeat. It's also the place that employs many of our society's low-wage, entry-level workers. Mm-hmm. And so when you shut those down, the economic prospects for a good portion of our society has now just been wiped out. And so when we started really pushing heavy and early on, we have got to come up with ways of providing measures of support for families who are nowhere near prepared. When you have a measurement of over 40% of people in this country could not afford a $400 shock with cash prior to COVID-19, and now that shock is happening and it's a lot more than $400, we knew that we had to be able to move fast and move quick. And so as an organization, we then started going through the process of saying, okay, well, how, despite the fact that we're now going to have to be socially distanced and separated, despite the fact that we are all now, and again, we had the extraordinary luxury of saying, listen, we're going to close the offices down, but everyone can continue working. Everyone's going to continue building out their work. In fact, we now find measurements of saying our work is more relevant now than ever before. It really was about how then do we prepare for the long haul that became, ways we're going to address COVID-19. And that really became kind of a core focus of those first weeks of just preparing for what we knew would be a really complicated time for our society.
I can only imagine. And look, there's a bit of that I'd love to dig deeper on, if you will. So given we are such close friends and great pals, I hope you don't mind. I will share, I may share some personal anecdotes through this interview. And this question leads itself to that a little bit, that before you took this job at Robinhood, I remember we were speaking, and we spoke multiple times about this role. And, I know you had a lot of options in front of you, and you're obviously a very successful person. And I hope you'll allow me to share this, you had options that were a lot more compelling from a financial perspective, right? And a lot more lucrative prior to taking this. And there were people who were willing to, write a whole lot more zeros at the end of that to try to land you. And you were gravitating toward this. And it was obviously a big decision. It's a very prominent role. And I remember asking you, this answer always stays with me. I said, Wes, why do you want to do this? Because I could tell you wanted to do it. And you said simply, it is because there are so many people across the city, across this nation, and you mentioned 50% of New Yorkers, who are one bit of bad luck away from devastation. Social devastation, economic devastation, familial devastation, and that one bit of bad luck can be something as seemingly trivial as losing their job, or slipping and falling and hurting themselves. But the point of the matter is there's such a large aspect of society that has been so vulnerable, and this was before the pandemic, and it's only unimaginable. You know how devastating it's been for folks like that. So, tell me a little bit about you're obviously out there in the communities. You were touring Chinatown just yesterday, and so tell us a little about the families you've come across, the stories you've seen, and the rays of hope that you've seen from the work that Robin Hood has done, because it's just such an integral organization to our city.
Yeah, I think about, and one of the things I love so much about our work is the families that we meet. They're families just like mine. They're families who uh, have been navigating and are continuing to navigate a world where, I think about my own journey. The fact is I moved to New York when I was young from Maryland, after my father died in front of me. And my mother uh, instantaneously became a widow, who was going to raise three kids on her own. And that was not the life that she prepared for, or the life that she had expected. Where she watched literally and instantaneously, um, every dream that she had just got changed. And she had a really difficult time with the transition. She moved us up to go live in New York, to go live with my grandparents. And my grandfather was a minister in the South Bronx. My grandmother was a school teacher in the South Bronx for 25 years. And the thing I didn't realize when I became the CEO of Robinhood, until I actually got into the seat, was one of the first neighborhoods that Robinhood invested in was the neighborhood that I spent part of my childhood in.
Mm,
It was that neighborhood in the Bronx. And so when I go back and we spend time, whether it is you're spending time over in Baychester, or you're spending time in East New York, or you're spending time in Chinatown, or you're spending time in Flushing, or you're spending time over in Brownsville, these are families that are just like mine.
mm,
Families who are every day just trying to navigate. Families who are every day get struck with bad luck, but don't have the luxury to give up. And they just
that's
keep pushing.
no,
And so it's a very personal thing for me when I think about this work, because I look at my own journey, and I know how much of it came down to the hard work of my family members around me, and the hard work of teachers and mentors and coaches and ministers and all this kind of thing. Um, but also how much of it came down to luck.
right.
And that's the thing that girds at me, right? Is the fact that luck should not have to be a prerequisite in our society.
Mhm.
Who's lucky enough to get this opportunity? Who's lucky enough to get that opportunity? Who's lucky enough to get this? Who's lucky enough to get that? Luck should not have to be a prerequisite.
Mhm.
And I think how we continue to think about our work is, it's not just about how do you address the human pain that we're seeing right now.
Mhm.
Right? It's not just about the fact that we have to support people who are food insecure and housing insecure and don't have proper educational attainments, and those who are coming home from incarceration who have no options when they're coming back out. It's not just that, right? Like I always say, I'm not in the business to make poverty more tolerable or to make it easier on people.
Mm.
I want to end it. I want to get rid of it. I want to make sure that children actually have a very real opportunity to be able to achieve their God given destinies,
Right.
and not knowing that we continue to have man made impositions that continue to sit in the way. And so, the way I think we continue to approach this work, and how I think I've continued to lead Robinhood in this space, is to say, when people say, well, poverty is a choice, my answer is, and this is not just a quantitative argument, it's a qualitative argument, that, what society, poverty is a choice. But it's not the choice of the individual who sits under the weight of it, right? It's
Mhm.
not like people wake up in the morning and say, "This poverty thing is great. I'm loving it," right?
That's right.
It's the fact that poverty is a choice. It's a choice of our society. It's a choice of our society about how much pain are we willing to tolerate in our neighbors.
Mhm.
How much pain are we willing to tolerate in those that are around us? And so we really try to move this with an aggression, that's not sympathetic in its nature, but frankly, it's empathetic
Right.
in its nature.
Right. And so on that point, I think that's very, very eloquently said and very well said. On the point of luck, there are a couple of things there that I'd love to dig deeper on. On the point of luck, I think that's a very important point, right? Because success in life, people say, is to make hard work and luck, and you want to be. No one knows where lightning strikes, right? But you want to be as close to the tree as possible when that lightning strikes. And your first book, The Other Wes Moore, which is behind me on my shelf, and if you haven't read it, definitely read it. Had enormous success, and it was an unbelievable story. And I just like to dig in on that story a little bit. And frankly, I remember you, even Oprah hosted you on her show. You were famous before Harry and Meghan were in that respect. But I'd like to talk about that bit of luck and that divergence because it's uncanny. The power of the universe is uncanny as well, and the fact that you had this gentleman who lived in Baltimore, grew up in the same neighborhood as you, and that's really a story of two different roads, right? A bit of luck and a bit of strength from your mother and your family behind you, which propelled you a certain way, and a lack thereof, which propelled the other West a certain way. And just talk about that a little bit and what you've seen in Baltimore and in those communities.
Yeah. So, this was a story where I first learned about Wes because I got a call from my mom, and I was living overseas at the time. I was studying abroad in South Africa, and this was back when calls overseas were really expensive. You know what I
Right.
mean? Now it's like FaceTime, and now you can talk to someone literally across the globe for free, right? That wasn't always the case.
That's right.
And before it was really expensive to talk to anyone for any period of time. And when I think about it, from that time when the phone rang and it was my mom, and I was kind of like, hey, Ma, everything okay? And she's like, yeah, I should tell you something. She goes, I have to tell you about these wanted posters that are in your neighborhood. And I was like, got it. Not sure why wanted posters in Baltimore justify a $5 a minute phone call.
No kidding.
And then she was like, because they had your name on it. And that was when I first learned about Wes Moore.
Mm.
And I first learned about this gentleman who literally at the time when when he was finally incarcerated, the places where we were staying were we were in the same neighborhood. We're around the same age. Both grew up in single parent households. Both had academic and disciplinary troubles growing up. And as I was overseas, and at that point now getting ready to head off on a Rhodes Scholarship, he was getting ready to spend the rest of his life in prison for the botched armed jewelry store robbery that ended up murdering an off-duty police officer. And that was the first time I learned about him. And then the more I got to know him, I started eventually writing these letters, and he started writing letters back, and these letters turned into visits. And now I've now known Wes for 17 years. He's now in year 20 of his life sentence.
Mm.
And he's still here. I mean, he's still in Jessup Correctional Institution right now as we speak. And it serves as this constant everyday reminder to me about the fragility of where we are, about how small decisions in one direction, which you could have nothing to do with,
Mhm.
and small movements in another direction, which you could have everything to do with, can help determine which way we go.
Mhm.
And it's never lost on me, right? It's never lost to me not just how thin that line is between our life and someone else's life. It's also never lost to me. I think it's one of the things that it really provides me with a sense of urgency in everything that I do, and a sense of urgency in the work, because there is a measure of fragility that we have to understand and embrace with our
Mhm.
time. That nothing is guaranteed, nothing is certain,
Mhm.
and so the time that we do have here, we'd better push hard on it. That the time that we do have here, we'd better take advantage of it. And I think about it in context, Moose, where sometimes I'll talk to Wes, and he'll ask me questions that I almost think are like juvenile. And he's a really smart guy, really thoughtful, all this kind of
Such
stuff.
as like what's an
Like,
example?
he'll ask me, he's like, tell me about your wedding again.
Mm.
I've told you about my wedding 4 times. Like, tell me. He's like, so what'd you guys have for dinner last night? And I think about it before I say what kind of questions I think about it, I say, like, because that's a really interesting question to him.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I finish talking with Wes, or when I finish visiting Wes, or now in the case when I finish Skyping Wes, because I haven't been able to see him in over a year now because of COVID.
Sure.
Um, I could leave and say, all right, I'm gonna go grab a slice of pizza. Yeah, I'm hungry. I'll go grab some Chinese food. I think I'm gonna go. I'll go have a piece of fruit, or maybe I'll just wait.
Right.
I'll later. And he doesn't have that choice. He doesn't have that option,
That's right.
and he hasn't for close to 2 decades, right? And so I say that where it's the small things that we enjoy, the small liberties that we enjoy, that not only do we sometimes take for granted, but it kind of reminds us of the level of fragility
Mm-hmm.
in that. And I think about that where, and again, this is not being said to um in animes, you know be like a woe is me to Wes. No, I tell people, I know why he's in prison, and I don't need anybody to remind me, right? Like, there was a gentleman who went to work one day and didn't come home,
Right.
to no fault of his own.
Right.
There is someone who had to explain to his wife why she was now a widow. Someone had to explain to Sergeant Prothero's kids and to his brothers and to his parents, why he wasn't coming home. But the other thing that I do know is that even our worst decisions don't separate us from the circle of humanity.
That's right.
And
That's
if we aren't willing to understand Wes's life and lives like Wes, then we're doomed to keep on repeating this.
exactly right.
And I just feel like the worst possible takeaway from tragedy is when we act like tragedy didn't happen, because then tragedy keeps happening. And that's the thing we really have to avoid in all that.
That's right. And no, I think that's very, very well said. And look, a key component of your success, right, and choices. When we spoke about choices, is a woman who I have gotten to know and to love, and she's just such an incredible woman, full of. I think her name says it all, right? Her name is Joy, Joy Moore, your mother, and such a happy woman. Infectious with her happiness, but also a very strong, strong person. And the choices she made, given this lesson is in leadership, right? And we're discussing leadership. Ordinarily, when folks think of leaders, they think of heads of state, right? Or senior people in government, or captains or titans of industry, celebrities, athletes, whatever it may be. But the simple fact is, for each and every one of us, our notions of leadership are formed at a much earlier age, and they're generally done by either our parents or shaped by the communities that raised us.
Yes.
And for you, both apply here. And it is the sacrifices your mother made for you and the choices she made for you. And I think it's no secret that, you and I were both wayward, mischievous children when we were younger. You probably more than me.
That's okay. No, that's
Practice
that's
yourself.
okay.
Yeah, that's okay. And despite, your
It's
best
the
efforts,
journey. It's the journey.
exactly the right line of the arc.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
um,
Buy
but
low, sell high, man.
exactly. Exactly. Despite your best efforts to try and run away from the opportunities she provided you, which at the time, you didn't know were for your best, and she made you stick with them. So I'd like to talk about leadership in that sense, the role model of your mother and the role she played and your grandparents played in shaping who you are today.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I mean, I, I, I think that one of the greatest blessings that God gave me was one that I didn't ask for, right? And it was the day He asked Joy Moore to be my mother, right? I could not have been blessed anymore. And it's interesting because I remember having a conversation with Wes about about fathers, and Wes became a grandfather when he was 32 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember having a conversation with Wes, and we were talking about his dad. And I was actually, when I told him I want to go look for your dad. And this was, as I decided that I wanted to write a book, because I known Wes for years before even the idea of the book came about. And I told him if I find him, I want to be able to give him something. So I asked Wes, said, "Hey, why don't you write a note to your dad? And when I find him, I want to be able to give it to him." And I don't know. Finally, he came up and he wrote this note, and it was beautiful, but it was really complicated because it was part love and concern and sympathy and apathy and hate And like, it was just, it was a whole lot in
Hmm.
like 5 pages.
Hmm.
And I remember having a conversation with my editor about it. And he said, "Did you do it?" And I said, "Did I do what?" He said, "Have you ever written a note to your dad?" And I said, "I haven't." And he said, "Well, if you're going to ask Wes to do it, it'd probably be nice if you did the same thing."
Mm.
That's very fair. So I went to actually my dad's gravesite
Mhm.
and I sat there and I just started writing my ideas, my thoughts, not worried about editing, whatever like that. I just started writing. And I remember going back and having a conversation with the editor again, and he was looking what I wrote. He said, "I don't think yours is any less confusing, to be very honest." But one of the things that so it kind of highlighting the fact that I think we both are still very much wrestling with
Mhm.
this absence,
Right.
right? We're still wrestling with this void. The thing that I do know though with that is, and the thing that I think he kept on, that Wes pointed out too, was one of the things I kept on wanting to feature and think about is how blessed I was for having a woman who wasn't perfect, but she was perfect for me. And I feel like that is, when we talk about leadership and leadership frames, is that no one is expecting your leaders to be perfect, right? No one is expecting your leaders to walk on water. No one, if you look at an individual and you have nothing, if you think that everything they did is perfect, if everything they did is amazing, everything they did is what everything they did was, then frankly, that's a level of, that a level of idolship that, I think we have to be honest that, deserves its place in certain categories, but is probably not the most honest reflection of human beings, because human beings by our nature, we just have flawed elements to all of us, right?
That's exactly.
Um, However, in my mother and with some of the leadership lessons that I know I took from her,
Mhm.
is she never stopped believing in me. She never stopped believing that I could be better.
Mhm.
She never stopped believing, despite all the evidence in the world and all the reminders from teachers and principals and everything else that, hey, if Wes just makes it through, consider it a win. Um, and she never bought that. And I think that's an important tenet that I think about leadership as a whole, where if you have a leader or if you are a leader who believes in your people, even in a way they might not even believe in themselves yet,
Mhm.
if you believe that what we're trying to do here is bigger than any of us can even imagine, is bigger than what we've accomplished so far, that everything we've accomplished is good, but there's more. Keep pushing, keep fighting. There's more.
Mhm.
That's something that I think I think I really took from her. And the way that she looked at me is the way that I want to look at my entire team,
Right.
where she was never willing to stop fighting for not just us as a family, but she was never willing to stop fighting for us as individuals to live up to our destinies.
Right.
And I feel like it is a beautiful tenet of leadership that I think we want to think about and really try to embrace as well.
That's right. No, that's very well said. And um, you said so many things that are so compelling. And my next question, if you'll allow me, maybe a lengthy one, because what I want to do is set the framework and set the context here, because it's an issue that deserves a whole lot of attention. And it's going to incorporate elements of the leadership we've discussed and hopefully take us uh, down another path as well to explore further. So, and that's the issue of race, not only in corporate America, but in America. And frankly, look, I'll begin by saying it's astonishing that it's 2021 and we're still having this discussion in such a way. But the silver lining of it, if there is a silver lining, is that we are having the discussion much more openly now than we did in the past. And it's been a series of tragic events that have led us to have this very honest and open discussion, but we're having it nonetheless. So I will begin by, I'll share a few, I know you and I have talked about this at length over the years, and we've confided in each other over the years. So I'll begin by setting it up a little bit, if you will, and then I'm going to ask you to help take it further, in the sense that we we're taught at a young age. I was taught this, and I know you were taught this as well. Two key things, right? That in order to succeed in corporate America, we're likely going to have to. We won't be able to be ourselves in a way, in the sense that we are going to have to learn to fit in and to dress a certain way and speak a certain way and carry ourselves a certain way. And one of my parents came here as immigrants, and they sacrificed so much for myself and my brother. And one of the earliest things I was taught, and this was drilled into me multiple times, was that look, based on the color of your skin, you're going to have to work twice as hard as the person next to you to get the same amount of recognition. And I'm certainly not speaking for all minorities or people of color here. I'm just speaking from my experience, and I know your experience as well. And that's something you learned as well. And the second part of that equation is that there are going to be times when people say unkind things to you, right? And try to bait you into a situation. And the best way to react is not to react. You have to have thick skin. You have to brush it off. And I know your entire mantra is elevate. So in a way, you have to elevate yourself about this. And now you and I have worked together in corporate America, and we've worked separately in corporate America. And while by and large the experience has been really terrific, there have been times where we've been reminded of the color of our skin and that we are minorities. And at times it's been passive aggressive, the reminders, and at other times it's been a little less passive and a little more aggressive. And I think it's, and there was nowhere for us to go to. You can't like walk in a door and say this happened to me, because you're very cognizant of showing it got to you. And I know the way you and I dealt with it, at least, is we would take that, whatever that energy was, and we would put it in ourselves to fuel us and to say that we are very determined people, right? And we believe in ourselves. And regardless of what you may say, and regardless of what you're trying to do through whatever insecurity you may have, we're going to use this to fuel ourselves, to build ourselves better, in a sense, because we know who we are, we know where we're going. And although you may have tried to, throw a spanner in the works and tried to stop us, if anything, you have made us more determined, and you've provided tailwinds to us. So in a way, thank you. Thank you for doing what it is you did. Um, and I think the big question is, what do you do with that once you do succeed? So you're a very successful person by several accounts, and I'm extremely proud to be your friend for several reasons. But one of the reasons that I am so proud is what you did 10 months ago in the wake of the tragic and brutal murder of George Floyd. And this was a time where there were some CEOs who were being very genuine with their expressions of disbelief. There were other CEOs who were waiting to see which way the wind blew, right? And were being very carefully calibrated as to how they would respond and where they'd respond. And you responded incredibly emphatically, with sensitivity, with thoughtfulness, but you also made it very clear where you stand. And as a CEO, I'd love to explore that more in terms of what went through your mind when you made that decision, because David Gellis in the New York Times wrote a huge piece on you at the time, and you were calling for action in corporate America and board diversity. And I think there was at the time a feeling, which may still persist, that government may not be able to make the difference, and it is up to the corporate world, whether in America or beyond, to help bridge that divide. So I realize this is a lengthy question, but what I'd like to explore is how you had the courage to take such a stand when not many other people were doing it at the time.
Yeah, no, and thank you. And I tell you, I mean, I harken back to even some of the earliest conversations that we had after everything happened with the murder of Mr. George Floyd, and just trying to think through how should our society be thinking about this in this moment. And it was part of it where it was important for me to share the idea that this is not just about policing,
Hmm.
right? We've got to address the issue of disparate policing, and we've got to address the fact that while policing reform is needed in all communities, we just got a very unneeded reminder of how important it is in communities of color, and that this was not just about Mr. George Floyd, because before him we also had Michael Brown and Philando Castile and Freddie Gray and Anthony Anderson and Chris Brown and Tyrone West and Breonna Taylor and Laquan McDonald and Eric Gardner and Sandra Bland and Walter Scott and Tamir Rice and so we had to address this issue of inequitable policing and lack of accountability when lives are being taken. But we also have to understand that the way this shows itself is not just in inequitable policing, that race is still the most reliable predictor of life outcomes across the board. The data continues to show that whether you're talking about educational attainment, whether you're talking about wealth, whether you're talking about health disparities, whether you're talking about maternal mortality, that literally across the board, race matters when you're looking at the construct. And you know, and I thought about it even in the construct of our own upbringing moves and the places that trained us. You know, I was, you know, recently Johns Hopkins University just did a report where they did a study and realized that Johns Hopkins, the person who Johns Hopkins is named after, despite the stories of him being this great abolitionist and all this kind of stuff, was a slave owner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to myself that this is now the perfect completion of my training, where whether it is Johns Hopkins University, whether it was the fact that I was trained on military bases that were named after people like, you know, bases like Fort Benning and Fort Hood and Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg was named after Braxton Bragg, a Confederate general, a traitor, and not a very good military officer.
Right.
And we named Fort Bragg after him. That I went to Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship, named after Cecil Rhodes, a virulent racist, and someone who you know, who's literally responsible for the death of tens of thousands of people. And I remember when I thought about the very last question I received for the Rhodes Scholarship was by a gentleman named Steve Pfeiffer, who was the chairman of the committee. And I won't forget it. He said to me, he said, "Listen, Wes," he's like, "you've studied in South Africa. You're African American. You know these issues, and you know the history of Cecil Rhodes. How can you accept his money?" And I remember pausing,
Right.
and answering his question. Said, "I do. I all those things you said are right, and here's the reason I can accept his money. Here's the reason I'm proud to be here as a finalist. At that time, a finalist for the Rhodes Scholarship. One is, I said, I know that Cecil Rhodes, when he first established his scholarship, he did not have me in mind.
That's right.
He is probably doing backflips right now in his grave, considering the fact that I'm now a finalist to be a finalist for Rhodes Scholarship. But I also know this: how many people had to fight and lose their lives and bleed in order for me to be here? And what would I be saying to my ancestors and those who had to fight in order for me to be here, for me to simply now have an opportunity to lift up others with me and say, "No, I'm good. Thank you." I think this is a really important moment, not just for communities of color to take a real stock of where we are, but it's an important moment for all of us to understand the beautiful mosaic that is this country.
Right.
To understand that the power of this country is the fact that we embrace people from different backgrounds and different collections and different histories. And that's what makes this place so special and so unique. And when I think about the things that turn, and why I'm actually optimistic in this moment, because the thing that I think turns moments into movements is when it's not just the oppressed population that's demanding justice. That's what actually turns moments into movements. What turned the apartheid moment into a movement was when it was not just Black South Africans who were saying, how can we condone a system of government that allows this? And when you saw everyone from not just individuals and activists, but when you saw corporate America who were saying, "You know what? I think I'm going to start divesting from apartheid South Africa.
Right.
Because I don't feel comfortable putting my money into this."
Right.
When we saw moments coming into movements, when we saw a collective, when it was just not our LGBTQI, friends and family and brothers and sisters who were coming out and saying love is love.
Right.
And I'm not willing to fund people who don't believe this. When we saw what happened in Washington, last year, there were people protesting for decades about the
Mhm.
fact that we had a professional football team with a racist moniker as its mascot.
Right.
And people every single day, every single year, buying the merchandise,
Right.
cheering. And protesters have been protesting this for decades to no avail. And then when corporate America, when FedEx said, you know what, I'm actually no longer having my name on a stadium,
Hmm.
and I'm actually going to start pulling my funding
Hmm.
because I'm no longer comfortable with this. Within weeks, gone.
That's right.
And so when moments become movements is when you actually start watching how it's not just the impacted population that's demanding justice. And so when we start seeing this, and that was, the thing we really wanted to push with the power of corporates in this moment is your job is not just simply to say, I'm going to give my team Juneteenth off and black up my Instagram page.
That's right.
You have a power. You have a power to change the dynamics, to change the dialogue, to change the landscape because they move based on where you were telling them to move.
That's right.
And so that's how, as we look at measures of accountability, corporate accountability, collective accountability, it is about how do we take our unique strengths in this moment? How do you have a conversation with your team and with your board? I remember, I having a conversation with a corporate CEO who was saying, I brought someone in to tell my board about they wrote a book called Bias, and I
Right.
had them come in and talk about the book. They're like, what else can we do in this moment? And I said, what do you talk to your board about at every quarterly board meeting?
Right.
You talk about your assets, your liabilities. You talk about your pipeline, your new product pipeline. You talk about lawsuits you guys have, right? That's what you talk about at your board meetings, right? Um, how I know you've made an impact is, do you talk about this
Hmm.
at every board meeting? Do you measure this? Because if not, thank you for doing a book report, but that's all it was. That's all it was.
That's exactly right.
You've got to measure it. You've got to measure progress on it. And this is the type of thing that I think for our corporates, our partners, that this is you're not just you aren't just in this work.
Hmm.
You must be of this work
Hmm.
and understand your unique power in order to drive measures of sustainable change in that.
So on that point, I think that's an excellent point because the vantage point you bring to this discussion, I think, is very unique in the sense that you understand the social imperatives here. You understand the moral part of the argument. You understand the political dynamics, and you also understand from your time as a banker, from your time serving on corporate boards, the economic aspect of it. And that's something that you hit upon, which I think is crucial here, right? That money makes the world go round, whether folks like it or not, and simply with the way consumers vote with their wallets, right, will influence behavior. So from to the extent you can divulge this without naming names, from your perch as a board director at these illustrious places, what are you seeing change? Are you hopeful for the change you're seeing? And what are you seeing simply in terms of
Yeah. So I am hopeful for the change that we're seeing, and I'm hopeful because I think people are realizing these are not feel good measures. And I'm really proud of our activist community, and I'm proud of our consumers because I think people are realizing that people are voting with their wallets and they're voting with their pocketbooks, and they're basically saying if people do not share my values, I do not have to buy your product.
That's right.
There we now everything in many ways is so commoditized at this point, right? Where if I want if I want a computer, or if I want a water bottle, or if I want a handkerchief, right? I can go a lot of places for that. There's not one handkerchief place that has the market cornered on handkerchiefs,
Right.
right? And so with that, it also means that part of what we have to do as consumers, we have to understand our measure of power. That the thing that I buy is not just something that I think is going to look nice inside of my jacket, but everything we are is a statement. Everything we are is a statement of our values. Everything we are, everything we stand by is either an endorsement, or it's me saying, I do not tolerate nor will I accept that. And this is my way of protest.
Hmm.
And so I think for a lot of corporations, we've seen corporations that have moved smartly, have moved aggressively in this moment, and because of it have gained market share,
Mm-hmm.
because they've been able to take on a measure of connection with a community because they show that our values match yours.
Mm-hmm.
And we have watched corporations that have not done it. And some of them, they aren't even around anymore
That's right.
because they either move too slow or whatever the case is, or they didn't take this seriously. This is not a stick your head in the sand moment.
Mm-hmm.
This is a moment where for each and every one of us, we need to be thoughtful, we need to be aggressive, we need to be creative, and we need to be passionate about what it is we're trying to get done. Now, part of that is who, as our leaders, who are you surrounding yourself with? Right? No one is going to have all the answers to all this stuff. I'm learning, frankly, I'm learning things every day. Wes, you shouldn't say this. You shouldn't, whatever, like that. This is bubbling up in this community and you should really pay attention to it. And I love it. But I want to make sure that I'm surrounded with people that are basically protecting all of my flanks and helping me to understand where are my soft tissue elements and making sure that they're helping to fortify them. Right.
That's right.
And it's one of the reasons that we believe in this idea of diversity. I'm not telling people, you should believe in diversity. You should believe in being able to support people from all over, not just because it looks cute,
Hmm.
not because it'll help you when you have to present your stats at the end of the year,
That's right.
not because it gives a great image to put on your annual report. Like that's not the reason.
Exactly.
The reason is because having this diversity of ideas and opinions and people who can cover off on blind spots, it makes you better.
That's exactly right.
And that's why we want to push for it. It's not to be selfless, it's to be selfish.
Right.
And so this is something that is really important, particularly for our corporate partners to be able to have an understanding of that right now. Is the reason that to push on this is, again, not just because it feels good, but it's because it's going to be the fastest and the most powerful way for you to advance your mission and make sure that you are aligned with a customer base. If you have people who understand all elements of your customer base that are around the table and have the freedom and the flexibility and the power to be able to share their ideas and thoughts, it'll make you better as a leader.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's an excellent point. And so, look, shifting the conversation a little bit in a different direction to leadership. I think these are all excellent points you made. I'd love to explore the personal elements of leadership a little bit with you because I remember, again, harkening back to the days before you took the Robinhood job. I remember you telling me when we were having this debate that there's this whole notion of balance, right? Balance in people's lives. And I think balance for us mere mortals is very different from your definition of balance. And you remind me of the guy at the circus, who's spinning 50 plates on their finger and saying that's adequate balance. But before you took this job, you said it's not, I asked, I was like, what about Dawn? What about Mia and James as they grow up? And you said, oh, I'm going to commute from, Baltimore, my home in Baltimore, to being based in New York. And I was thinking you'd, spend the week in New York and on Thursdays or Fridays head to Baltimore for the weekend. And when I brought that up, you said, no, I'm going to commute daily. I said, what? I said, you're out of your mind. How can you possibly commute daily? But with you, I've learned that just don't ask, Al. Just don't ask, period. But now I'm asking, how has that been? What sort of balance? You have done it successfully as well. What have you learned from that experience? I know it's been very trying for you. You don't sleep very much, but that it shows true commitment to your family and to other aspects of your life aside from work. So I'd love to explore that a little more as well.
Yeah, uh, it's hard as hell almost, and it's something that I think actually really helped to lead to the decision, frankly, um, to decide that it was my time to step away. And I'm really proud of what we've been able to get done in this organization during this period of
Mhm.
time. I mean, you know, since I've been the CEO of Robinhood, we have increased our reserves by 6x.
That much.
Since yeah, since
My
since
goodness.
we since we've since I've been the CEO of Robinhood, we have record margin increases in our
Mhm.
organization. We've raised over $670 million in my time in 4.5 years. We have built out new initiatives. We built a policy wing for the first time in the history of the organization. We have national initiatives that are focused on urban, rural, and suburban poverty for the first time in the history of the organization. I'm incredibly proud of how we've responded in COVID and also before. Uh, but the other thing that I know is that when I first made the decision to go to Robinhood, I didn't ask my kids their opinion.
Mm.
and they were too young, right? I mean, Mia was 5 and James was 2. So it wasn't like I was sitting down with them and saying, let's have a family meeting, right? They're 5 and 2. And so I made the decision that I was going to kiss them goodnight on Sunday night. And by the time I'd wake up, by the time they'd wake up on Monday morning, I'd be gone. And I'd spend much of the week away and going back and forth. But oftentimes, by the time I get home, they were already still asleep, or by the time I would leave, they're still sleeping. And then this year happened.
Mm.
And now they're no longer 5 and 2. They're 9 and 7. And they have opinions. And as you know, we'll continue on, they have opinions, and they don't just have a voice, they have a vote.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I'm having conversations about office reopening, they're like, reopening what office? You mean the one in New York? You mean being gone that much? And they were very clear that I was outnumbered.
Mm-hmm.
And I took that seriously. And so I think it's the hardest thing in the world to be able to strike a balance of the fact that, and it's just kind of the natural evolution of human evolution that, at the time where for many of us, we're starting to hit not just a crescent, but in some cases, really the kind of the takeoff point or a peak of a professional career, also happens to be at the same time of the natural human evolution process when people start thinking about family.
That's right.
And having children. And when parents are getting older and all. So like, it just so happens that there's like this collide moment for many of us, that the time that your career starts to do that, as is the other family responsibilities are doing the same thing.
That's exactly right.
And we have to make a choice. We have to think about, what is that strike? What is that balance? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? What is the right thing and the time and the season for everything else we're trying to pull together? And for me, what made sense was that it was time for a necessary ending, where I'm incredibly proud of the team that we have built. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we have done. I also know that the time and the kind of husband I am and the kind of father that I am, once I started to feel a rub on those things, it was time to think about things a little bit differently, where I can still be passionate about the work I want to get done and passionate about the issues I want to work on. But you just really have to think hard about the platform.
No, that's right. That's right. And look, you've left the organization far better off than how you found it. It was already such a powerhouse when you took the helm, and I think it's a testament to your leadership and the team you built around you. And I still find it shocking, in a really, really positive way that you were the leader of this organization, right? Because sometimes in the rarefied world of not-for-profits, they don't necessarily pick someone who happens to have grown up in a community that they're serving, right? So I think your understanding of and your compassion for ultimately the folks you're serving and the organizations you're serving has served the entire organization very well. And I'm cognizant of time here, so I just want to end on just a couple of questions. One is mentorship, right? When it comes to leadership, and that it's very difficult for a person to raise themselves up by themselves, and whether if it's not family or your immediate community. I know the importance of the role mentorship has played in my life, in my career, and I know some of my key mentors are doing this right now. I'd love to hear about mentorship from you, because I know you've had great mentors along the line, and just if you could touch upon that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think about so much of my journey has been littered with the importance of mentorship. People who have guided me, supported me, and that's the thing. When people say like, well, do you have a mentor? I have a mentor, but I have mentors, right? I mean, because also there are certain people who are really important mentors to me for certain aspects of my life.
Right.
And that's what I think is really important. People understand. It's like, the burden of being a mentor is real. So that's why I'm very careful about not just who I choose as a mentor, because I take it seriously. But also like, what exactly are you asking for? There's some people in my life who are great mentors for how to be a good husband. Right. I just love how they are as a husband. And they serve as a mentor to me when I think about that, right? My relationship with Dawn. There's some people who are amazing fathers, and I'm like, they're a mentor for me for that. There's some people who are amazing at business, and I'm like, they're a mentor for me for that. Now, there's certain people who are great business mentors who will never be a father mentor to me, because I'm like, I don't want to model what they do on that, but I'll model what they do on that, right? And there's some people who are amazing husband mentors, but then I look at the fact how they run their organizations, where I'm like, oh no, 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 no. But I think that's okay. I think that's all right, right? The fact that we have people who serve different functions in certain assets and elements of our lives, because we do try to capture best practices. And it goes back to this idea we were talking about before, where, no one is a perfect being, right? And so it's about, what are you taking from the people around you that you admire and you take away from? Like I got to tell you, most, and I'm not just saying this, when I think about people who are amazing fathers, husbands, sons, friends, business people, you, my friend, are like the very, very, very top of this list. And I say that with the deepest amount of respect and sincerity. The fact that you make time for everything and everyone is just remarkable to me.
That's kind.
And no, but it's true, right? It's true. And I think about it where, the ability to watch and to model the things that you see in people that just mean the world. And that if I can just do a little bit of what that person does, I'm better. That's really, really meaningful. And so I think as we kind of craft this out, that the role of mentors and mentorship in our life, it just is really about finding those pieces and those things and those elements in our life that you watch kind of what the North Stars are, and model it, tailor it, identify it. It's not just like, this person is my mentor.
Right.
I have mentors, double,
right.
Dozens of them, who all serve different functions. And I think that's okay, because I think that's how I've been able to manage and kind of take best practices from a collection of things to think about how I want to try to do my life.
That's a fantastic answer. And look, I think this has been incredibly informative, and from a personal standpoint, I'm grateful for what you said about me. We should do this daily. I can use the ego boost.
I love it, man. Let's do it.
Very, very. But look, in all seriousness, I'd love to. I know we're running up on time. I'd love to thank you, for the time you took out of your busy schedule. I know you've been shuttling back and forth between New York and Maryland, and I know how busy you are, especially in the final stretch of your days as CEO. And on behalf of Edelman and on behalf of everyone who's watching this, I want to express my deepest, most heartfelt thanks for your time and your insights. And I think the world is going to be watching, what you do next, whether it is governor of Maryland or whether, the moving trucks of 1600 Pennsylvania someday, have your name on them. But suffice to say, we are all rooting for you, and we're so grateful for your leadership. And I'll just turn it back to you for some parting words if you'd like.
Brother, I'm so grateful for you, and I'm so grateful for you for the Edelman team. Like, how supportive you all historically have been of Robin Hood and so many other, so many organizations in the work and the fight. And and the only thing I'll really close with is just a collective belief and a collective love that the only way we move forward is together.
Mm-hmm.
We are not going to advance with any real degree of certainty by separation.
That's right.
And I think history has continued to teach us that we all have a role, we all have a voice, we all have a piece, and there's an imperative nature to all of us that I think we just have to move and take very seriously. So I'm just hugely grateful and thankful for all of you, and I look forward to this, and I look forward to being with you all and being partners in the work for a long period of time.
Well, we very much look forward to that, and I think that's a perfect positive note to end on. And thank you very much, Wes, for doing this, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, brother. Give your family my love.
And yours.